In the 70s, 80s, 90s, basically economy, education. These were the major fault lines. But increasingly so, it has now become religion, the major fault line. So we have had all these fault lines, and you know the term fault lines is very current because of what's happened in Japan. When you talk of earthquakes, you have to talk of fault lines, yeah? Because fault lines are linked to earthquakes. Now, in a society like ours, where our greatest concern is an ethnic quake, the Japanese earthquake, for us, ethnic quake, we have to talk about ethnic fault lines. So the major fault line in the future will be related to religion. And when it comes to religion, we have to think, we have to reflect. Because this is one area where people don't really want to think. And this is true of people in many parts of the world. It's not just Malaysians, believe me. When it comes to religion, the reaction is different. It's a gut reaction. And this is why it's dangerous. So thinking is very, very important in dealing with the challenges that we face. So these three major attributes for the youth of the future and the importance of thinking. Now, thinking is something which is the product of other things, as all of you know. You'll be able to think better if you know what issues are, which means that you have to read. And here again you find that reading is something which is not really a Malaysian pastime. For a nation which has a literacy rate of 93%, which is very good, 93%, serious reading is not something that Malaysians seem to like. Reading a serious book on whatever, politics, the economy, culture, philosophy, we don't really read serious stuff. Hantu-hantu, cinta stories, these things we like. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with cinta stories. Hantu is something else. I just don't understand why lots of people get hooked onto hantu stories and so on, but that's not what we mean by reading. I think we have to read serious stuff, we have to know our history, ethnic relations, so reading is very important. Discussing with people, listening to others, all these things would sharpen your thinking faculty. And this is something we should see as a challenge. And I say that young people, you are in a better position to do this compared to people like us. We are over the hump. Many of us, we've got very set ways of looking at the world. But for you, you are still young, and this is something which you must be prepared to do. To think, to reflect about issues, read as much as you can. For me, the most enjoyable thing about university education was the opportunity to read. Much more than I have been able to do at any other phase of my life. Because there you really can read. This is the sort of adventure that you must be prepared to undertake. Reading, seeking knowledge. Very, very critical. Now, if we are prepared to do this, then I think there is some hope for the future. That we would be able to build bridges. And I see certain areas where this is very, very critical. Why it is so important to understand one's own community and reach out to the other. And I just want to give a couple of examples before I close. Now you take this issue that has created so much debate and controversy in this country over the years. The whole question of the NEP, of justice, of fairness, of equality. It's understandable why a policy like the NEP and the issues related to the NEP should create so much debate, controversy in this country over a long period of time. Now, if you look at it on the basis of the attributes I discussed a while ago, seeing it from the point of view of one's own community, the other community, trying to understand it in totality, at the same time thinking, reflecting, reading about this. If you apply all these things to the NEP, one would come to a conclusion which is much more balanced than what you get from most people most of the time. Most of the time people would say, if one is, I'm sad to say this, if one is from, say, a particular community, the conventional view would be NEP terrible. Everything that's wrong in this country is because of the NEP. A lot of non-Malays in this country feel that way, especially the educated, and this is what is very unfortunate. Now, this is not correct. It is a prejudiced, jaundiced view. Everything that is wrong in this country is because of the NEP. The NEP is terrible. It doesn't bear out in terms of the reality. Now you've got the other view, the other side, where people say, oh, the NEP, very important, survival of a particular community, the Malays and other Bhumiputras, it depends upon the NEP. The NEP should be there ad infinitum, meaning by which forever and ever, and all the policies and principles connected to the NEP, they're fundamental for the success of this nation. That is also wrong. It is a one-sided, jaundiced view. Now, if you really reflect on it, you will find that there are strengths in the NEP and there are weaknesses. Let me share with you what I think is the greatest achievement of the NEP. What is its greatest achievement? The greatest achievement of this policy, which in its implementation has been directed towards the transformation of the Malay community and other Bhumiputras, but essentially the Malay community. Now, the accelerated transformation of the Malay community in a very short period, within 30 years, has been one of the major reasons why this country has held together. If there wasn't that accelerated transformation of a community, which, mind you, if you look at the situation before 1969, you look at the class structure in Malaysia, the Malays were so weak economically. 64% of the Malays in the 60s lived below the poverty line. The Malays were of no significance in numerical terms within the middle class or the upper class. Now, if that situation had continued into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on, believe me, when we had the financial crisis in 1998, there would have been a communal cauldron in Malaysia. We would have had riots on the streets, much worse than what happened in Indonesia, where you have disparities, including ethnic disparities. Things were really bad in Indonesia for a variety of reasons. Indonesian society, in a sense, collapsed. But in Malaysia, we survived partly because there was that accelerated transformation of the Malay community, to a point where by the late 1990s, the beginning of the 21st century, the Malays had become a substantial component of the middle class, transforming the nature of the middle class from a mono-ethnic, a largely mono-ethnic middle class in the 60s to a multi-ethnic middle class is what has given stability to this country. This is something that one cannot ignore. So it's easy to rubbish a certain policy if you're not prepared to be objective and analytical. Now, this is something that one has to keep in mind. There are very few people who would say these things openly because one is always thinking of one's audience. One doesn't want to say things which may displease one's listeners, but I think one has to be fair and objective about this. This is the achievement of the NEP. Now, what are its failings? Two major failings, if you look at the NEP. Number one, in the process of achieving this transformation, the NEP created a new gap within the Malay community, between the Malay have a lot and the Malay have a little. Not haves and have-nots, which is the old dichotomy. You talk of haves and have-nots when you have absolute poverty and people who have good wealth. But here, you had people who had something, but they felt relatively deprived, and rightly so, compared to the Malays, including some who had benefited from the NEP to such an extent that they'd become filthy rich. So this gap between the have-a-lot and the have-a-little within the Malay community is a major challenge. And that's a challenge that we face today.